Hello, Sarah Sabin, executive and team coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am really excited to have with me here today Leo Bernstein, who is the founder and CEO of LineSlip Solutions. Leo, hello, welcome to the show. And could you briefly introduce yourself to my listeners?
Happy to. Sarah, thanks so much for having me. My story is a simple one. I'm on my third career. I started out as a finance person, was an investment banker, later a fund manager. When I saw that career somewhat the options winnowing, I moved into entrepreneurship. I started out purchasing commercial property and syndicating the equity in those properties, and ultimately saw an opportunity to build a software company to organize commercial insurance data.
Wow. Interestingly enough, Leo, I am also on my third career. So my first career was tax accountancy.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Sounds exciting.
You don't need to lie. Okay, so I'd love to know more about what are the most significant challenges you faced in the early days of your business and how you overcame those challenges.
Sure, that's a great question. Simply put, it was product market fit. And I'm sure it's not an original answer, but I do think it's the answer of the most, with the most substance. And what I mean by that is that you can identify problems in an industry like commercial insurance, which really hasn't evolved meaningfully in a few hundred years since it started in the Lloyd's Cafe. You can imagine that there are a lot of smart people that are aware of a whole bunch of different ways to make the production of insurance more efficient or more effective. But for whatever the reason, it doesn't evolve. And so the original vision for LineSlip Solutions was, this is a data-driven industry, insurance, because it's a financial market, just like stocks, bonds, or any other derivative product. Yet the industry participants don't really have great access to their own data, or data that might be relevant in transacting in the insurance marketplace. And so the vision was, hey, if I can automate some of these manual processes or figure out a way to aggregate those data, then I can advantage any of those market participants that have access to my data. And that can be pretty strategic.
So, I mean, in more traditional industries, such as finance, such as insurance, even where something, really does make a difference, makes things more effective and productive, there can still be a barrier which looks like, well, we've done things this way forever, and therefore we have a big team that sits there doing it, so we don't see any need to change. So right. How do you overcome that kind of mindset?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'd say for us, what I realized initially was I was trying to solve cost-related problems. And it was always in front of me, and because my background was more on the analytics side than it was the sales side, I should have thought, hey, this is an extremely profitable business for insurance brokers. It's about a 30% EBITDA margin business. So they should fundamentally care more about adding an additional dollar in sales than they should care about me saving them a few pennies on their expense. And that's in fact true. And then culturally, it's very much a sales-driven industry. So I spent a bunch of time pushing on strings, trying to solve problems that people didn't care about, all in the interest of aggregating these data that I was referencing. And ultimately, I ended up solving a problem around aggregating insurance data for private equity funds that their broker partners did care a lot about, because we are being used for the benefit of those clients, but we're being really employed as a sales enablement tool for our broker partners, right? We have a capability that other brokers may not have, and we know how to use it for your benefit.
Yeah, and I'd just like to summarize that whole point about product market fit. Sometimes it takes a while to find it. Sometimes you need to solve the wrong problems before you get to the right problems to solve.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the key is recognizing when you are not resonating with the market and not being afraid to pivot, which is somewhat oft used, but to just change direction a little bit. It doesn't need to be such a strategic pivot. It could be more of a tactical pivot. It could simply be, it's the same product, but we're positioning it in a different way, or we're driving value in a slightly different way. And often that can make all the difference. Right? You need to really understand your ideal customer profile. So the key is really, really understanding your customers and your customer segment and what their goals are, and the culture of the organizations in which they live. Because you actually highlighted what I thought was a great point around sometimes the organizations or the people that are managing groups within those organizations don't really want to give up those people because that's their little fiefdom, or that's how they drive value for themselves, or they're perceived to be driving value because they're in charge of all these people. And we've had a couple instances of that as well, where the individual sort of incentive structure is misaligned with their organizations because they don't want to give up their resources.
So I'd love to know more about today, right? Fast forward, and what are the things that are keeping you up at night at the moment? And I'm going to add a little extra to that question. If you had some magical pixie dust, that you could sprinkle on any problem to solve it, what would that be?
Yeah, well, so should I be excluding sort of the availability and access and cost of capital? Because that's always an ever-present challenge. I've got wonderful investor partners, but they demand a return. So, and my objective is to be as efficient with my capital as I possibly can, but we're still in growth mode, so I do need to raise additional capital. But in terms of operational challenges, from my perspective, we have at our core a technology that we've developed that's extremely effective at extracting commercial insurance data at scale. And but at the same time, right, we are establishing a new category in the marketplace. And so while there's a ton of interest from corporates in what we do, sometimes it's not always as easy to get the economic buyer to say yes. So making it easier to get to yes, making it clear around our ROI, which I think is really well defined, but not always resonant with the economic buyer, not the user buyer, but the economic buyer. And then, the key for us is to be integrated with some platform partners that all insurance brokers use. And so to the extent that we can do that, we will vastly accelerate our growth. So that's, and truthfully, in the next 6 to 12 months, I'll have a pretty good understanding of what that success might look like, because we're actively talking to them now.
Okay. On to the topic of leadership, how do you personally define strong leadership, and how do you see it impacting the growth of your team?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I've strong feelings about. For me, leadership is about having a common vision, right? Making sure that everybody understands where we're going, at least to the extent that they need to understand it and they feel part of a whole that is being directed in a certain way for a certain, for a certain goal. And then two, it's allowing people to do what you've tasked them to do. It's agency. Right? I feel very strongly that the reason we've had very little voluntary turnover or involuntary turnover, excuse me, is because we've really invested a lot of responsibility and agency in our team. So, hey, if you're the director of marketing or VP of marketing, we trust you that you know what you're doing. Obviously, we want to collaborate with you. We want to hold you to certain goals that you've established in conference with us. But we've hired a professional to do a professional job, and I never fully appreciated, having come from the finance world, how important that is, and the notion of growth. And so if you're in a business that's dynamic and growing and you feel part of a team that's focused on the right thing and aligned properly, and I don't mean compensation alignment, I mean alignment in terms of priorities. It's a wonderful thing. It feels good, right? You enjoy going to work every day. And that, by the way, is also fundamental to the values the organization has. So I'm really, really proud of our values. And I think they're values that most everybody agrees with, but we weight them heavily, right? I've never heard anybody say that I don't like working in teams. I mean, well, maybe that's untrue, but I certainly haven't, like on a personal level, I have never heard anybody say, I don't believe education is important, but it's how you prioritize those values, right? So for us, accountability is really important. Customer centricity is really important. Being scrappy, that's like that entrepreneurship culture where you're not trying to get everything right. You're just trying to get it right eventually and as quickly as possible, right? Getting it right enough. Does that make sense? So, and that's the hardest thing for people that come from larger organizations to appreciate, is that not everything is optimized in a fast growing young organization. And that's by design, because if you wanted everything to be optimized, guess what? You wouldn't grow as fast, right? It would be a constraint. And I had somebody who used to work for me who struggled with that. And their comment to me was, hey, we need an HR department. And I said, you're absolutely right. But we don't need one right now, right? The only thing that matters is the product, is the customer, and growth. Those are the things that matter right now. And as we get bigger, it's going to be harder to coordinate. We're going to have to establish standards. We're going to have to do things so that we stay aligned, right? And it's figuring out what to do, when to do it, that doesn't slow you down, right? So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but hopefully you get a sense of what I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just picking up from the last few things you said, that focus, right? At any one time in a company that is in growth phase, you can only focus on a certain number of core things at any one time. And you obviously went through what some of them were. And the other thing I want to highlight here is that all things in good time. So, as you said, we don't need an HR department now. You might need other people with different skill sets later down the line. So, having in mind, okay, here are the things that we bring in at various points in the business, can ultimately help growth, but also being very conscious of exactly what you need right now. So you're not wasting time, energy, money, etc. when you're trying to grow fast.
That's right. And I think just to reiterate one of the points I may have made in passing is the challenge, for me at least, has been, because I'm doing it for the first time, knowing what to focus on when. And it's not always obvious what the constraints to growth are, beyond obviously customers. Customers are always a constraint to growth. But I mean internally, what do we need to do to support that growth, and be able to execute as effectively as we can, with limited resources, right? We're not, we don't have billions of dollars to spend. So,
And that's a really key point. You might not necessarily know what to focus on that will move the needle the most. So the Pareto principle states that 20% of what we do produces 80% of the results we want, but oftentimes people don't actually know what that 20% that they should be doing is. You need space, reflection, and also a certain element of experimentation to get there.
That's right. That's right. I think iteration is key. And I think framing problems is also important. And recognizing that, life is, or execution is a continuous, it's a continuous experience. So at any point we can make changes, but unfortunately as human beings, we tend to think of things in a digital way, like 1 or a 0, but we live in this analog world. So it's never, it's never 100% one way or the other. It can be oftentimes in between. You can also make changes and adjustments, right, based on market feedback or team feedback. So people always like to use the word luck or serendipity or some combo. And that isn't to say there hasn't been luck involved in our execution to date. Absolutely, there has been some, but not the way most people think, because we're constantly making changes. And it's not worth really going into an example because it's too domain specific to my business and it may not resonate with people. But the way we went to market at the end of 22 has changed since then, simply because the corporate spending environment has changed. And so it was harder to get corporate risk managers, who are that's our ideal customer profile among our direct corporate business, to get their bosses to approve LineSlip Risk Manager, which is the product we sell them. But our broker partners, it's a different story. And so recognizing that we need to change in response to market feedback has been a huge asset, and something I can credit my earlier life as an investment analyst for developing, because I was wrong a lot. So it was okay being wrong. My ego is accustomed to it. So for better or for worse.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's good life training, really, because it feeds into the concept of, well, failure is how you succeed eventually. And if you're scared to fail, if you're scared to get rejected, if you're scared to receive negative feedback, you're not going to grow, period, the end. I'm not even going to qualify that statement.
No, that's right. That's right. You have to, and so when I speak to younger people, I always encourage them to be comfortable taking judicious risk, right? And also, and I think this is more of a social structural challenge, as our society is obviously fraught with all sorts of problems these days. But if you don't aim high, you can't ever execute high, right? If you aim low, you'll always be low. So you always have to reach, always, and you may not always get there, but you have to always reach for it. So
couldn't agree
that's
more.
what we're trying to do. Yeah, trying to do.
So in terms of you as a leader, how have you invested in yourself, and what steps do you take to grow and evolve in your role?
That's a great question. I probably don't invest enough in myself, but I actually recently attended a sort of a leadership development course that was held by one of my investors, and it was really, really constructive. And it's not that I learned a whole bunch of new skills or tactics really around addressing certain problems or managing my time better or whatever, but it was a moment to reflect on how I address certain problems or certain situations. And so what I like to do, and I think this is a product of having been in therapy for a number of years earlier in my life, is that I see myself, I think, a little bit more clearly than a lot of people. That's not to say I don't have bias, but it is to say that I have no problem making changes and based on feedback. And I get that feedback mostly implicitly because obviously my colleagues are not that comfortable, wagging their finger at me. Some are. Some I wish wouldn't, but I'm just kidding. But the fact is that all that feedback is good, and I listen to all of it. I don't always agree with it all, but I listen to it, and I throw it in the crucible, try to distill some things to take away from it, and incorporate it. And by the way, I try to do that in my personal life too, and I credit my successful marriage with my ability to do that. To say I learned to put the toilet seat down.
Yes, yes. I fully support that.
Yes, sure you did.
So actually what I want to draw attention to here is your emphasis on developing your own self-awareness. So self-awareness is us reflecting on ourselves by asking ourselves questions, thinking about why we do things, etc. But it's also understanding how we are perceived by other people. And that's not to say we should take on board the opinions of everyone else, especially if they don't know us at all. But for those that you work with, for those that you are surrounded by and spend a lot of time with, it's worth doing that exercise regularly so you can start to identify perception gaps between how you see yourself and how other people see you. And the more alignment there is in that, the more self-aware that you are as a person. But generally most people don't do that enough.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'd say it's not as easy as it might sound, simply because of the dynamic of being CEO and everyone else fundamentally working for me. Even though I don't treat them that way, I very much treat them as colleagues. I feel like we're all in partnership toward a common goal. But at the end of the day, I'm the CEO and they work at the company. And so it's challenging to make sure that I'm not listening to things in a distortion field or in an echo chamber. And I really find that one of the things that's most important at being a leader is being a really astute listener, because you're not, it's very difficult and oftentimes in some cases it's impossible to get somebody to actually tell you what they really think. But if you're an astute listener and observer, you generally can determine those things. And so I would say that that's something else that I developed reasonably well when I was an analyst, because I was just an analyst and all I really did was listen and observe and think. And I was wrong a bunch, right? But it's easier in an organization, particularly when you're working with people closely and you get to know them and they get to know you, and so you understand what a baseline is in terms of behavior. So if anyone's departing from a baseline, there's got to be a reason for it, and then you can pick at that reason and hopefully get some insight. But I have to tell you, I love my team. I think they're awesome. We're not perfect, but we are trying to be better. And I feel that the other nice thing about growth is that it demands all of us evolve, not just me, but the whole team. And it's never about me, it's about the team, because I couldn't do any of this without the team. In fact, I do very little of it, right? I'm just the guy, hopefully, at the top directing things. But none of it would happen without them. And I think I'll really try to remind myself that it's really, really important that people feel ownership of our common purpose and our goals. And it's less about what people get paid, because sadly, no one's getting rich yet. at LineSlip Solutions, but around the richness of their role and what they take away from our collective achievements. And something I'm really proud of. And I'd like to think that because people have stayed, that they feel energized and rewarded for being there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with the statement around it's not you, it's the team and how the team grows together and learns together. With one caveat, I suppose, the tone is set from the top. So if you have someone at the top that has a fixed mindset, that isn't open to change, that isn't open to growth, it stunts the rest of the team because people entrain to the behaviors of the people that they observe that are leading them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. My approach to leadership is, I like to think, is a somewhat subtle one. I don't like dogma. I don't like Kool-Aid. I want people to be excited about our opportunity, but also want them to have balance in their lives, right? I encourage people to take time off. It's easy for someone to redline or overwork in an environment where you're working remotely. And so it's really important to be attuned to the needs of the team and to make sure that people are taking care of themselves. The benefit of being remote is that you have massive flexibility, as we talked about off camera. We have the ability to work from wherever, and I strongly encourage people to do that. I have a senior teammate who was working from his recreation vehicle, and he was driving all around and had a Starlink, connection to the internet. And God bless him, he was really effective. But not everyone can do that.
Yeah, and again, another key point: different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely, yep, that's right. And I'd say that that's also really important. We live in a fraught time. We're an organization that's developing software for commercial insurance stakeholders. We're not a political organization. We come from all sorts of different backgrounds. I don't want anyone to think they have to have a certain view or think a certain thing or be a certain kind of person to come work at LineSlip Solutions, right? What they do in their own time, what they want to have in their own personal conversations, or what they want to talk about, that's up to them. But I'm certainly not going to make anyone feel bad if they disagree with me about this, that, or the other thing, because I just care about people respecting one another, right, and feeling comfortable in the work environment. I just think we're in an environment, or we're in a society today where companies feel obliged to make comments, and I think, and I understand that, and I respect that at some level, but you're never going to be able to please everybody, right? And there are going to be lots of people that disagree with you. And if you do so, right, the constituency that may be as important as your customers, your colleagues, and your team, they might feel uncomfortable. And we don't want.
Yeah, I agree. Final question, Leo. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
That's easy. Take more risk. Bet on yourself sooner. You're pretty good. Don't worry. Work hard. It'll work out. Don't be afraid to change. And don't be afraid to fail. And wish I'd done that.
Well,
but
better late than never.
Better late than never. Yeah, I'm having a blast, so I am having a good time. I consider myself very blessed.
Good. Leo, wise words, and it was an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And to my listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to take part in the Leading in the Modern Way interview series, please do reach out to me. Bye for now.